What's up, everybody? How's it going? It's Tuesday. Let's get tactical. We got another Tactical Tuesday show today, and I went to a tournament this weekend, so it's going to be one of those Tactical Tuesday tournament things, I guess. That'll be fun. It's Tyranid Week. The new Tyranid Codex is up for pre-order. Releases on Saturday, so people who got Saturday events coming up, I hope you're excited. If you do have access to the new Codex, I do have a tournament scheduled for this coming weekend, and it does sound, unfortunately for me, like I'm not going to be able to use the updated Codex. So we're talking today about my games from this past weekend. This was using 8th edition Codex stuff with Crusher Stampede. It was a good old time, and I wanted to cover my last couple of games with the full power Harridan, with the entire wombo combo of Crusher Stampede plus Leviathan Supplement, which, at least on the side of the Leviathan Supplement, sounds like will probably be going the way of the Dodo, which is unfortunate, but not entirely unexpected for the new Codex. But I really just want to talk about my games. We can talk about some of the stuff coming up for the new Tyranid Codex as well, if we want to be doing that. But for the most part, I think it's going to be just doing some tournament reporting. Hope everyone in chat had a good weekend. Hope everyone's ready to talk some Tyranids. Hope people are hyped for the release of the new Codex. I think it's going to be interesting, and we're already seeing some innovation coming out of this new Codex. A couple of events took place over the past weekend using the new Codex. I have a video coming out about that. And some of the lists that are popping out and some of the interesting things about those lists. So I'm hyped for it, obviously. I hope everyone else is ready to get stuck in. It's going to be good. But today we're talking about 8th edition Codex stuff and some Harridan. Unfortunately, I don't think Harridan particularly good in the new Codex. They sort of clamped down on the differentiation between Titanic and non-Titanic stuff getting buffed with the abilities from the Codex. So things like Catalyst obviously get degraded or downgraded if it targets a Titanic unit. You can't give them adaptive physiologies, so there's a lot of downsides. They also don't benefit, generally speaking, from sub-faction abilities because they'll be in super heavy auxiliary detachments, which is pretty unfortunate. So, yeah, it is what it is. Artemis Steve had a terrible weekend. I'm sorry about that. I hope things are looking up this week for you. Next weekend hopefully will be better. We got new Tyranids coming out. It's exciting. It's exciting stuff. Anyway, so this is just a 3-round RTT, just a standard old RTT. My local game store uses US Open terrain layouts, so we were on US Open with again all the 8th edition stuff, and was pretty representative of the sort of updated metagame. So I think overall a relatively tough field. We missed a couple of the truly powerful Harlequins list, but we had there were a couple Tau players there. There were a lot of Sororitas randomly as well, and a bunch of Adeptus Custodes as well. I think as is to be expected. So yeah. So Chaos Space Marines when? Yeah, we're getting some rumors about Chaos Space Marines, right? They're going around. The rumors abound about the CSM Codex, and more stuff happening. And it sounds like that rule was just leaked from the Chaos Knights Codex. I saw doing the rounds around the rumor sphere as well, where the Chaos Knights Codex has an Agent of Chaos clause, where if you can include a Dreadblade in a different Chaos detachment without breaking super faction faction abilities. So it looks like, at least with Chaos Knights specifically, the Chaos super faction sort of design ethos is going to remain intact, which is frickin' sick. So, I don't know, that's exciting. Hopefully we get some new Chaos stuff, post-release of that within not too long, because it has been way too long for Chaos Space Marines. Although they're still doing their best to fight back, and I know, there are some builds that Harlequin players are a little bit wary of for Chaos Space Marines. 1,000 Suns detachments, they do a lot of mortal wounds. Emperor's Chosen. I almost reversed the thing. Emperor's Children have the kind of... they're good against dedicated transports generally because of Endless Cacophony, but I don't know. Chaos Space Marines still kicking, and I think if the meta wasn't in a place that it was, I think you could see Chaos Space Marines in top tables a lot more often, or at least mixed Chaos lists, not necessarily Chaos Space Marines. Anyway, let's talk about this tournament that I went to, chat. I'm pretty chuffed about it. So I played a Crusher Stampede Harridan list. This is almost the entirety of the list, like in this little picture right here. There's some Tyranid warriors down here. They're chilling. And then almost the rest of the list is right in this picture. So very small footprint, which is pretty fun. Not a lot of deployment drops. I ended up out deploying, or my opponent ended up out deploying me, I think, every game, which is kind of fun. But obviously we're playing High Fleet Leviathan, so we get access to strategic adaptation. So we get the redeploys. So being out deployed, not that big of a deal in this one. Do we think Agents of the Imperium, like Assassins, will be released in line with Guard? I don't know if I would want to speculate about a Guard Codex release anytime soon. That would be probably a while. This is... by the way, you can get access to the list that I played either down in the video description or !lists in chat will get you there as well. That'll bring up a link to it. But I played a list on stream using Crusher Stampede Harridan because I was experimenting a lot with him because I wasn't really sure what to do with the Harridan in Crusher Stampede because obviously it's really good combination of effects. All of the bonuses, all of the psychic powers that you can put on the Harridan are super good in Crusher Stampede. In addition, he doesn't ever gain a sub-faction bonus, so losing out your High Fleet adaptation, he already doesn't have one. So losing on your High Fleet adaptation in exchange for -1 damage is literally no problem whatsoever. And that's a big deal. It means it's a strict upgrade for Harridan. The issue becomes that the rest of the list doesn't support the Harridan very well. In a standard like Harridan battalion, you have a lot of like random chaff that can not only pressure your opponent to sort of maintain board control, but also to score objectives for you. And the big problem of the Harridan is that he doesn't score objectives at all. It's an aircraft, so even when he's in hover mode, he doesn't do anything with objectives. So you have 1/3 of your army, 700 points, cannot hold objectives full stop, which is not... It is problematic for the army in general. Generally speaking, the goal is to kill all of your opponent's models with the Harridan list, so you're not that worried about it. The downside is that Crusher Stampede is so limited on the size of the army in terms of unit count that you don't have things like Lictors or Ripper Swarms or Sky Slashers or Gene Stealers, all these little things that can run around and play the objective game. You don't have those in Crusher Stampede, and the number of infantry units, which are the cheapest units you can take, are severely limited. So I played a list on stream that was a Crusher Stampede Harridan that was originally like the predecessor to this one. It played Swarmlord double Neurothrope, and I was very proud of it. I was like, this is the list. This list is great. And then someone pointed out to me that during my iteration of the list, I had added the Neurothrope, but I hadn't added a monster to unlock the Neurothrope because of the Army of Renown. So it was actually illegal, which was devastated me. I was like, I thought I'd figured it out. I thought I'd found the best Crusher Stampede Harridan list. That was, I think it had a Tyrannifex in it, alongside a Psi Tyrodule and Swarmlord with the double Neurothropes. And the two Neurothropes I think is important because you want one caster to be casting your mass convergence powers. You want one caster to be casting Catalyst on the Harridan. And then you need something else if you want to take a psychic action like a Ritual or a Psychic Interrogation. So having the third caster was kind of crucial to the army, and not being able to fit it in because of the Neurothrope was a little bit of a problem. So I took a Maleceptor instead. I essentially cut the Neurothrope and the Tyrannifex, turned it into a Maleceptor and a Moloch. And I think I like the Moloch. Originally, I had a Harpy. Every time I played a Harridan list, I would fit a Harpy in there, and essentially, instead of viewing the Harridan as a 700-point unit, it was an 860-point unit, and it just had a Harpy staple to it. And now it could hold objectives, because there's a Harpy just following Harridan around. So I ended up switching that for the Moloch because it's cheaper. The Deep Strike is similar to what a Harpy can do, but obviously a Harpy's better, I think. They're just, you save 40 points dropping it to a Moloch, which is pretty appreciable. You're definitely tight on points in any sort of Harridan list. Now, I wish I could find a place for Focal Essence in the list on the Maleceptor, but I couldn't end up doing it, so we didn't have any reroll damage rolls for the Hive Guard, which is too bad. But we did have that Neurothrope, like I said. He has Adaptive Neurolobe, which is very important because the Harridan siphons a ton of CP over its normal operation. So you end up just feeding that guy full of command points. So getting any sort of regeneration is a big deal. You also, I also had the Swarm Lord in there, and the Neurothrop also had the Chapter Master Warlord trait Swarm Leader, so he could pump the Hive Guard with some additional damage. 2 units of Tyranid Warriors, both with bioweapon bonds. One of them typically goes on either the Hive Guard or the Hyrule. The other one is always on the Harridan. And having the Maleceptor is a little bit of a benefit in that the Maleceptor usually operates kind of in the middle of the table where it's just running around and grabbing objectives from people. And that means that it can link pretty easily through the center of the table to the Harridan, who's obviously tends to like operate in your opponent's deployment zone. We had the Moloch and the Side Hyrule in heavy support, and then obviously the Harridan with Dermic Symbiosis to double his wounds count for bracketing. You never want that guy to bracket. If he brackets, it's big bad. You're trying to get 700 points of work out of him every turn, and if he's -1 to hit, he's having a tough time with that. So that's the list. And I was pretty happy with it. I think it was a pretty happy medium of what I was trying to go for previously. We have a lot of shooting in it, obviously, between the Hive Guard and the Harridan. And then the Scythe Hyrule adds a little bit of melee threat. I'd rather have a Hive Tyrant, so he can jump over walls, but at least the Hyrule also acts as this big sort of focus piece where your opponent has to either shoot the Hyrule, in which case the Harridan does whatever it wants, or they have to shoot the Harridan, in which case the Hyrule is undamaged and is much better at taking objectives. Generally, the correct plan is to kill everything on the ground and leave the Harridan alone, but that means you're going to take immense damage over the course of the game. So anyway, that was the list I played. Let's talk about the games that I played it in. Gotta zoom out before we go. I got my finger in this one, so that's oh, you can't see it. I shouldn't have said anything. It's just off the screen. Whew. All right, good. So round 1, I played against Aaron. Aaron was playing Silvertide Necrons. So it was 2 bricks of Necron Warriors. It was Eternal Conquerors, Relentlessly Expansionist, the Dynasty. So pre-game move 6 inches. Everything is objective secured. If it's already objective secured, it double obsec, so it counts as additional model. Which is great. I mean, it's the combo. I think if you're not playing like a Novak or a Mefrit, you're always in on objective secured faction, and I think it's still good. And especially in the current timeline where a lot of armies are shedding their obsec bodies because they're kind of dead weight in a lot of matchups, then this Dynasty becomes that much better, because if your opponent doesn't have obsec and you're just running scarabs and wraiths and garbage into their face and taking their objectives every turn, a lot of times you can just zero them out on primary like really easily. So I think it's pretty solid, and it's been a matchup that I've had trouble with in the past. It feels pretty even for the Harridan style of Tyranids, at least in the previous version where I was playing out of Crusher Stampede. In Crusher Stampede, I think it actually might be harder because I have less objective secured on the table. I literally only have the Warriors, and then I'm trying to hive mind Imperative people. And I don't have the same level of infantry clearing that I used to have because I used to play Gene Stealers in the list. We don't have any Gene Stealers, we just have a Scythe Hyrule. So we're going to see how well this Flamer can do. But this list was... it took a Chronomancer Overlord with Orb of Eternity, so pops a Res Orb at the start of the turn, and with +1 to resurrect your guys. 2 bricks of Necron Warriors, like I said. 1 brick of 10 Lich Guard. 2 units of 5 Wraiths, 1 unit of 5 Locust Destroyers with 2 Heavy Destroyers. Not attached, obviously, because they're out of model count, but 2 individual Heavy Destroyers, as well as some Crypta Thralls and some Cryptex. We had a Chronomancer and a Technomancer, I believe. 2 Chronomancers, actually. Oh, yeah, no Technomancer, just 2 Chronomancers. So, I think relatively standard. I was happy to see no Scarab Swarms, especially since I didn't have Smashy Hive Tyrant. He was really good at killing Scarab Swarms, but it would be on the Hyrule to do that, and unfortunately it eats like so much of my firepower in the early game that I then don't have to kill like the multi-wound Wraiths and stuff that are actually going to be dealing damage to me in the late game. So I was a little bit worried about it, and we were on Tide of Conviction, which is a little bit of a tough mission for me as well. So there's 6 objectives, 1 in each deployment zone, and then there's 1 right here. You can't really see it. 2 of them that are just outside of each deployment zone. So here are my opponents. And then there's their home objective up in the top there. And the bonus point for this one is to hold objectives on your opponent's side of the table. It is a hold 2 to score 5. It's essentially the update of Overrun, because with the objectives are sort of shuffled a little bit closer to the center of the table. This is a relatively tough scenario for me, especially against the full OBSEC army, because I have a tough time maintaining control of my objectives. At the very least, it just bleeds me a ton of CP for Hive Mind Imperative, and that makes things a little bit tough. Even worse is my opponent won the roll to go first, which is pretty brutal. That's because it forced me to actually redeploy backwards. What my opponent could do is that he had Wraiths sort of on the line here. These ones, I think, had just moved up the little cargo container over here. And that if the Wraiths go, full forward and he reveals Sudden Storm, his command protocol, then with Relentless March, the Wraiths move 16 inches plus the 6-inch pregame move, so they move 22 off of their deployment line. So if they're deployed on the line, right, so they're 10 inches up, they move 22 inches. So they're at the 32-inch line, which means they are... is that right? They're 9 inches off of my table edge? No, they're 11 inches off my table edge. So they could, on turn 1, push to here, essentially, and then charge. So what I did was I actually had deployed a lot of stuff on the line, or I deployed, I think, the Maleceptor on the line, and these Tyranid Warriors that are down in the corner here. And as soon as I lost the roll to go first, they pulled back pretty far. I also pulled the Maleceptor back to protect the Harridan and the Hyrule. Actually, I think I had deployed the Maleceptor on the line, and I put the Hyrule on the line, and I actually moved both of them back to deny a turn 1 charge. I figured if my opponent wanted to charge the Maleceptor, that was fine, because it's like very difficult to kill, but I couldn't risk getting the Hyrule bogged down. I also, the one saving grace in this matchup is that I have the Harridan itself, which is a pretty good anti-deep strike blocker, because essentially it can take this flank and it deep strikes out, it removes deep strikes within 9, but it also can't be charged by almost anything, which means that my opponent doesn't have the opportunity to, for example, like put a big brick of Tyranid Warriors here, shoot into something valuable. They can shoot the Harridan, but they have very low chance of doing too much damage, and then charge to pile and consolidate and start touching my stuff and just ringing off my objectives so I can never get to them. But the Harridan being unchargeable for the most part is pretty good. And my opponent's not going to charge his flying stuff in there. He could charge in like locusts and stuff, but they would just die. So it seems like a pretty bad move. And then obviously he could jump in here on this side, but effectively all of his warriors had Gauss Reapers, so the only things that he could shoot when he dropped in were going to be the big heavy beasts. Maybe he could drop in to kill these Tyranid Warriors, which I was actually a little bit afraid of, because I need those Tyranid Warriors to be holding objectives, and if I lose them, it's no good. But I would rather them commit and me have the opportunity to kill them rather than them, just sit in the back the entire game and threaten like a late game sort of lockout. For secondary objectives, let me see if I might have forgotten to take down my secondaries. I know every game this event I took, I forgot to take my secondaries down. I apologize, everybody. Every game I took Engage in all fronts, because it is scoreable by the small warrior units until they're depleted, and it is scoreable by the Harridan. So I know I can get 2 per turn on Engage in all fronts, but I'm very bad at scoring Stranglehold, which is something that Crusher Stampede, a problem that Crusher Stampede doesn't generally have. And I took no prisoners, because my opponent had a lot of Necrons, a lot of Necron infantry, and in addition, a lot of resurrection effects, especially between the Necron warriors resurrecting with a bonus because they reroll their 1s, and the Lord being able to resurrect guys. That meant that you have a lot of opportunity to score multiple times off the same model for no prisoners, which is pretty exciting. And I think I ended up maxing that out by the end of the game. The Engage in all fronts was pretty good. The other buff to Engage in all fronts is the Moloch, obviously. The Moloch can pop in and score it for 1 turn, full stop, even if your opponent has full obsec. So the Moloch in this situation can't take objectives from my opponent because they're all objective secured, and there's no way to Hive Mind Imperative him before he comes up, but he can get me engaged, so that's fine. So yeah, pretty wary of the matchup. What my opponent did essentially make one mistake this game, and I think that was kind of taking his foot off the gas a little bit. So he went first. Everything ran up to the middle. He ended up taking, if I remember correctly, he had Purge the Vermin, which is a pretty good one because it discounts the Harridan when you're trying to score it. He had Ancient Machineries, and which ended up being these 3 objectives, these 3 here. And he could perform the action targeting those objectives, which ended up being a little bit tough for him because I was able to contest early and stop that from scoring too hard. And his last one was, I think, Grind Them Down, which is actually, at least based on my experience with the previous version of the Harridan list, is a pretty common pick against Tyranids because they have so many like 3-man models, units and stuff. But the thing you have to remember is, the thing you have to realize when you're visualizing how the game works is that there's no situation in which I'm going to reveal my army to my opponent. So I'm not like a normal Crusher Stampede list where I'm running dudes across the table to fight and take objectives from you. The entire army is going to like become this little tiny brick, and then the Harridan's going to fly around and get buffed by them, essentially. So it's a less defensible pick in the Crusher Stampede version of Harridan. It's a little bit better in the regular version that has Ripper Swarms and stuff. But it's still, I think, never a good pick against the Harridan list, especially when your army itself is relatively wide across the table. That said, the Harridan lists are always really tough to score off of. So I only have 3 Psychers, so I'm bad on Abhor. I have 2 characters, so I'm bad in Assassination. I have terrible No Prisoners, like maybe 7, and I have terrible Bring It Down. I give up 6-12. So I think Bring It Down is the play. It's just not a very good play, and if you don't have a good secondary yourself. And actually, come to think of it, I don't know if my opponent could have taken Ancient Machineries and Purge the Vermin, because he'd say that's 2 faction-specific secondaries. That's okay. It turns out not to have mattered a big deal. Oopsies. I think he could have taken Banners, I guess, and it would have been essentially the same. Banners would have been better. He should have taken Banners. What am I thinking? Well, that's embarrassing. I should have caught that on the day chat. I apologize. So my opponent moved up pretty tepidly, I guess. Yeah, he had Locust Destroyers, or excuse me, not Locust Destroyers, the Scorpek, the Canoptic Wraiths, on the objective in the middle here, doing the special action. He basically moved the warrior bricks out in front of both ruins to shoot at whatever came out, but he didn't have any really good shots, and I ended up declaring an encephalic diffusion on the top of turn 1 because I knew that he had either he could have veiled a big Reaper unit into range of my T8 monsters, or he could push really far forward with the Locust Destroyers and try really hard to get a good shot with them. And either one of those would be bad for me, so I elected to just nip that in the bud and declare the encephalic diffusion. So there was no reason for him to commit his Strength 5 guns that turn, which is why he didn't veil. And I think, like I said before, the one veil that I think would have been defensible would be to veil a warrior unit here and kill my warrior unit that was on the back there. I played a little bit aggressively, so I moved the Hyrule up. I didn't end up double moving him. He just moved up and shot. He killed a couple of the Necron warriors that were in front of this wall, and then he charged them and killed a couple more. I think with the breaking through a couple smites between the Swarmlord and the Maleceptor and the Hyrule, I killed almost the warrior unit, but I didn't clear them, which means a lot of them regenerated. I did, with the Harridan, I clipped out the Canoptek Wraith unit that was performing the Ancient Machineries action. Oh no, it wasn't performing the action. There was a little bit of a miscommunication. I thought it was performing the Ancient Machinery, so I shot at it, but the warriors were, so they ended up surviving. I did get a bead on the Locust Destroyers, and with a double tap from the Hive Guard, the Locust Destroyers had moved out here to get a shot on the Hyrule. Or a better shot on the Hyrule for the next turn. They probably should have just peeled out and not done anything and waited for the Harridan to commit, but that let me shoot them with the Hive Guard, and the Hive Guard killed them with a double tap. So it was a pretty good turn 1. We got 2 of the big scary units off my opponent's side of the table. In my opponent's turn, he ended up pulling out the Necron Warriors, the little 5-man, to the back over here, and then setting them up for a Resorb. So he pulled them out of all my weapon ranges and put them next to the Lord. So the next turn, the Lord could roll a big res. And I think he resed like 7 models or 8 models with that, which is about average. Just definitely pumps my no prisoner score, however. The other Necron warrior unit pushed pretty far over towards my objective, and it took it from me, put a bunch of models on the objective, and I basically just seeded that one. There was no way I was going to get it, so I had to give my opponent a couple 12s on primary, because I couldn't really trade models for points in this case, because I don't have that many models in my army. I'm pretty low on unit count. Now, the one thing that pulling that Necron warrior unit back let me do is kind of play a little bit more aggressively with the other warrior units, because my opponent no longer has the ability to port to this side and then just fight over this objective. So this objective was relatively clean. Now the Wraiths moved over, and between the Wraiths, the big warrior brick, and all the incidental shooting, as well as the heavy destroyers, which were absolute champs. I think I had exposed a Swarmlord to get a smite out the turn previous, which I wasn't sure about doing. I figured that between my, he only has 2 attacks. I have the 4+ invulnerable save, and I had bank CP to reroll it if I needed to. I could take 1 hit from the heavy destroyers on the Swarmlord the turn previous, and it would probably be okay. And I think one of them shot through for like 7 damage. So I did end up like rerolling an invulnerable save and failing it, which was pretty unfortunate. But what that let me do is push really hard for this objective, and instead of scoring my own objectives, basically trying to keep my opponent off balance on theirs. So he had moved the Wraiths over in the Lich Guard to charge the Hyrule. He ended up killing the Hyrule with all that stuff. I auto-exploded it with Animated by the Hive Mind, so I kill a Wraith and a Lich Guard as well with that for 1 TP, which is pretty good. And then back to my turn, the Harridan, who was over here, he hovered and flew over the building with the intention of clearing off this objective. So there was a unit of 5 Immortals there, as well as both heavy destroyers on the objective. I clipped 1 heavy destroyer with a Hive Guard shot. The rest of the Hive Guard shots, I don't think did anything. I think maybe we killed a couple of regular warriors with them. They were not particularly useful for the rest of the game. The Harridan turned around to shoot at the Canoptech Wraiths, and I was like, we'll repeat this fight again. We'll just clip out the second unit of Canoptech Wraiths with the Harridan, and it'll be fine. And with +1 to hit, +1 to wound, exploding 6s, he killed 2 of them, which was disappointing to say the least. I think my opponent made like 8 out of 10 invulnerable saves or something like that, which was pretty unfortunate. But the Harridan was undeterred. He was in hover mode, so he charged the Immortal unit and the second heavy destroyer that was over in on objective 6 at the top here, and we breaking through the Immortal unit to pick it up, and then his attacks killed the heavy destroyer. At this point, I was feeling pretty good about the Harridan's chances of survival. I ended up electing not to overrun it because I figured, well, I needed to score Engage All Friends first of all, but I also figured that if the Lich Guard turned around and took pressure off of these 2 objectives, that was going to be all good for me, so I was totally fine with that. If they wanted to go back and charge him, and he was unfortunately not shields up because he's out of range of the psychic powers. But I think he would have taken enough damage to be scared. But I think the trade-off would have been worth it to put these guys out of position. So I wasn't that worried about it. Now, what I should have done this turn is also dropped my Mawlock in, because one thing I realized is that taking my opponent off of objective 6, while it was a big deal because his ability to score that in the future would have been significantly tougher, he didn't have... he still had 3 to my 2 because the Harridan doesn't control that objective, which means that he still got a 12-point primary turn this turn. So I should have dropped the Mawlock somewhere over here or over here in order to take one, or in order to... I think there was a position where I could have clipped both objectives, to mortal wound everybody, and then take this objective, count him as holding that objective. And if I had done that, I would have stopped a 12-point turn on my opponent's part, but I didn't end up doing it. That's okay, though. There's always next turn. I was feeling pretty good on secondaries at this point, because my no prisoner score was pretty high, my engaged on front score was doing okay, and my opponent was having a really tough time with grind them down and ancient machineries, which, like I said, I think we're probably not maybe the most optimal picks. So he ended up pushing forward. He got all of the warriors onto objective 3, like I talked about. And they just started to shoot into my little dude's mech here. I took some random pictures of the back line. Here's the Necron warrior unit that had been regenerated by the Orb of Eternity from this guy. Oh, and then we got a sideways pick. Good stuff. So the subsequent turn, my opponent essentially just consolidated this objective, and this is why I said I think I appreciated that they kind of took the foot off their gas a little bit, because it meant that the warrior unit that was here that I would have had a tough time clearing entirely in one go. And remember, they do count as 2 objective secured models, so you basically have to kill the whole unit in order to actually take objectives back from them reliably. They didn't push to this objective, which I expected them to. So they could have moved up, taken some random pot shots, and maybe killed some warriors, gone for a charge, and if they make that charge, they basically just sink this objective forever, and I never get it. And that probably blanks me on primary, at least for a while. My opponent didn't end up doing that. They just they chilled, and they were just shooting at stuff. I think they fired at the Harridan for a turn and didn't really do anything. So the Harridan flew around, and the game plan was essentially just to start clipping out the my opponent's remaining objective holders and stopping them from getting a big score on primary, because I was still pretty low on primary. The Maleceptor got double moved by Swarmlord into Objective 2 and ended up charging, I think, the Wraith unit and breaking through to kill them. We also, the Moloch actually came up this time. It did straddle the 2 objectives, but you can only count as holding one of them, so it counted as holding this one. Did a bunch of mortal wounds, cleared the Canoptek, the little bodyguard guys. Am I blanking on their name? I just had it. I gotta look at the list. What are they called? That's really embarrassing. This is gonna kill me now. Somebody in chat help me. Get me out of this. Cryptothralls. Duh. Jesus. Alright, that's... The Cryptothralls died to the Moloch explosion, which was very exciting. The Harridan went in, and I think it ended up clearing between its shooting. Although its shooting, again, had another dud turn where I think I fired into a Necron Warrior unit and ended up killing 3 of them. Although he wasn't fully buffed at this point, to be fair, because I hadn't reset my chain, so he was out of range of the bioweapon bond. From back here. The Maleceptor had been back on my objective, so he was out of range to get chained the bioweapon bond. So to be fair, it wasn't a buffed Harridan shot, but it was a little bit unfortunate. But he went in, I think, breaking through the remaining of the weakened unit of warriors, and then fought into a character and killed it, and the character respawned. So we had used 1 resurrection protocol on one of the characters, but we had been able to clear out one of my opponent's obsec units. Now my opponent, on the flip side, went back in to try to clip out the monsters. So the Lich Guard went in to fight the Maleceptor. Unfortunately, had some pretty bad dice and wasn't able to actually kill that guy, which was pretty happy for me. And then the rest of the warriors were just sort of firing. I think the warriors fired into the Moloch and did a bunch of damage. And then he charged and tried to clear the Maleceptor with the Lich Guard charge, but wasn't able to actually kill him because he was buffed up with Catalyst. 4 plus a vulnerable save, pretty strong. So it was all pretty good. Obviously, the Trigon, or the Moloch, excuse me, ended up going down. Harridan swung around the side to essentially clip out the remainder of the characters. So he killed, I think, he had fired into the warriors there. My warriors moved up, and between the Hive Guard shooting and smites and a bunch of stuff, we ended up clearing this warrior unit. These guys got bogged in on the Maleceptor, which wasn't taking too much damage, and the Harridan started clearing out the guys who could actually hold the objectives. So from there, the game plan of just tabling my opponent so I didn't lose on primary was a go. The Warriors, in order to get bottom round 5 scoring, got double moved onto this objective to hold it. The Harridan shot one of the Chronomancers that was holding this objective charged the other Chronomancer was holding this objective, breaking through that one and killed it. And he had breaking through the Immortals the previous turn as well. This Maleceptor, I believe, ended up going down to the Necron Lord, the War Scythe on the Necron Lord, but it took a while for him to go down. So my opponent was left with the character and a bunch of Immortals remaining, but unfortunately not enough to keep him in the fight, because I was able to take it down mostly on secondary objectives. My opponent crushed me on primary, but on secondary objectives lost out quite a bit because he didn't score any grind them down. His Ancient Machinery was pretty low, but his Maneuver secondary did score pretty highly. That ended up being a 67-83 win to me. Again, it was a hold 2 mission where my opponent went first and got a lot of board control, which meant that I had very little chance to score tons of primary. So I scored 4 a lot of times because, again, I think my opponent's one big mistake here was not pushing for this objective as hard as he could. And if he could push for this objective and force me to like put stuff on it, obsec that stuff constantly, and maybe not even then be able to hold it, then my primary objective score is probably just blanked. You know, I maybe score 20. And at that point, he can make up for the lack of secondary scoring that he got. But again, I was pretty afraid of this matchup going in because my objective holding is very bad. So essentially, I had to just rely on the Harridan being able to clip out stuff that was holding objectives, and fortunately, breaking through kept me able to keep up on attrition in that way. And I think I breaking through besides turn 1. Is that right? No, turn 1 I also breaking through. So I think I breaking through every turn of the game. That's correct, right? Yeah. So we breaking through onto the warrior unit with the side tower duel, and then the Harridan moved over and breaking through here, and then the Maleceptor breaking through on the second warrior unit, and then the Harridan breaking through twice more. Yeah, we breaking through every single turn of the game to keep the mortal wounds going. Keep those mortal wounds coming. And honestly, like, that's such a big deal in the Harridan list, and it over the course of this event, I ended up using breaking through a ridiculous number of times because you just have to keep the damage output up because you can't really hold the primaries that well, so you have to kill your opponent and stop them from holding their own primaries. Anyway, that moved us on to round 2. So this was against Adeptus Custodes. So this was a Shadowkeeper's Adeptus Custodes list, a little bit different than what you normally see. Not quite an Emperor's Chosen. We were on Abandoned Sanctuaries this time, so no forward deploy, which didn't matter for either of us. But my opponent's list was pretty interesting because it was very ground-based, didn't really use the many of the flying units whatsoever. He had 1 shield captain on a Dawn Eagle, and that was it, and 1 grav tank, obviously. But everything else was infantry or dreadnoughts. So, and also being Shadowkeepers, while he does reduce my melee output pretty significantly because most of my models only have 5 or 6 attacks, so reducing them by 1 is a pretty big deal. That said, not having the mortal wound protection does mean that like my breaking throughs turned on and my psychic phase does a lot more damage, which ends up being a pretty big deal in this game. So he did have a Calexis Assassin as well, which I actually wasn't too worried about because while he does project the anti-psychic aura, which is a pretty big deal, I don't care so much about the penalties to hit because either I'm re-rolling against him with the Warlord trait or I'm just going to breaking through him and deal mortal wounds. So the fact that he could blank my Psychic for a turn wasn't that big of a deal, especially since I could still take Psychic Interrogation and his cast penalty aura is only 18 inches, but I can cast from outside of it. So I can interrogate him from farther away than he can give me a -2 to cast. And since I was planning on interrogating with the Neurothrope, who's going to be pretty far back regardless, I wasn't that worried about being able to score points off my opponent's stuff. So I ended up sticking with Engaged on All Fronts this time around. I wasn't sure that I could keep up with scoring Stranglehold against Foot Custodes because there's so much obsec, again, just like my previous matchup. But that said, I probably could have done it because I think I sort of underestimated the reach that my list can have if my opponent doesn't have like a ton of fast stuff. So again, I'm sort of used to playing Custodes against the bike list, and this list certainly didn't have all of that stuff, which is pretty, it was an interesting build of Custodes, but I do think I'm a lot more scared of the bikes for sure because of how fast and stuff they are. So we had a Calexis Assassin, a Blade Champion, who I hadn't played against before, with the Eagle's Eye Relic, so +1 wound, puts them to 8 wounds, and a once per game 3+ invulnerable save, so almost exactly an Armor Indomitus. The Shield Captain on Dawn Eagle, Trajan Valoris, a bunch of characters. He also had a Vexillus Praetor with a Vexilla Defensor. I think the dense cover Vexilla, the Vexilla Magnifica, is much better against the Harridan list specifically, but the Defensor works pretty well against a lot of the common weapons that you see, especially since you can use it on the 2+ save Dreadnoughts and they go to a 1+ save, and that makes things a lot tougher to punch through because they don't have a 4+ wonderful save. They're stuck at a 5+. There were 2 units of Sagittarum, 1 unit of Shield Custodians, 3 units of Alaris Custodians, 2 individuals, and then 1 2-man. There was a Contemptor Achilles, so the big spear guy, D3+3 damage, 1 Calidius with accelerator cannons, unfortunately, not blaze cannons, which would have been much better. But still, appreciable range output, as well as a Telemon Dreadnought with Eternal Penitent with 1 Storm Cannon, so the 3 damage gun, or alternatively the 6-shot 1 damage gun, and 1 melee weapon. Clyde never played on GW style terrain layouts. Would I say it's a better layout? Well, so I mean, I think that it's good. I don't know if I could say it's better because I don't know what we're comparing it to. I think it's very good though. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. I like it. And I think I especially like it, in my opinion, because it gives some sort of consistency to the 40k community. So like one thing that especially the competitive community does is everyone kind of, tribalizes around their own terrain niche. And so there's like, well, some people are WTC, and some people are, Adepticon used to have its own layout that was very different from the like FLG layout, and Pro Tabletop had their own layout, and then Nova had the Nova L layout, and like every tournament would have to like sort of pick a side, right? And there were like 6 different common terrain layouts, and the one thing, at least in my local community, the one thing that I appreciate was that GW said, like, here's the US Open, here's what we believed competitive terrain looks like, at least from a level that we can supply to an entire tournament. So, and from that, a lot of local events went like, well, this is probably the way to play Warhammer because it's the one GW uses. And to be honest, the terrain is functional and works great. It's nice that at least like having these bricks of obscuring terrain means that if you go to a tournament and they're like, we're using USO, you're like, I know what to expect. I know how my list operates in this terrain. It's all good. And I think that is a big deal for competitive consistency because it's much better than it was in previous editions. But like the power level of your faction in 8th edition, I remember, would vary wildly, but depending on what terrain you used. If you were like, oh, we're on Nova terrain, and we, like, ban short table edge deployments, you're like, all right, well, that changes quite a bit. So, interesting. Imagine a world in which Breaking Through and Crusher Stampede still exist in the new Codex. It'll be wild if that happens. Although, like, do you even use it? You probably do, right? Because, like, taking the 1-wounders out of your army isn't that big of a deal. You just have to like reorient a little bit. Although you're probably taking 2 Harpies, so it's like your monster count's pretty high. If you're like double Hive Tyrant, double Harpy, that's already 4. You're probably 1 Maliceptor, maybe 2, so you're at 6. And then you get like 2 warrior units, Zones, Venoms, Tyrant Guard, Neurothroat. So we're like already at a Crusher Stampede list. But the Hive Fleet adaptations are so good that like I don't know if you need it. You have the Thunderous Impact, or whatever it's called, the new version of Breaking Through, which isn't as good, clearly, but it's like almost as good, especially for a Hive Tyrant, which does anywhere between 4 and 6 mortal wounds pretty often. You have like Transhuman already. You don't need the Crusher Stampede Transhuman, so you're just getting -1 damage basically. So I think it is actually a question. Like, is -1 damage worth all the restrictions? And I think in a lot of situations, it's not going to be worth it. You also get the +1 damage thing, but that affects a lot less attacks now that a lot of the attacks are like flat 3 or flat 4. I guess it's just like the Maliceptor's melee weapon. If the big attacks on like a Maliceptor or a Haruspex, but it doesn't affect their little attacks with the +1 damage from... That one is Thunderous Impact. So I don't know. And there's not really... You're not really, like, hurting for invulnerable saves in the new Codex either, because you have the zone throw up ability. So, like... I think you could keep Crusher Stampede. Actually, I think the biggest difference is the counting as multiple models for holding objectives. That's the big one. Although you might see, like, Swarmlord get taken more often, because he can point at stuff to give OBSEC. So if you have, like, Carnifex is counting as 9 models, and then Swarmlord gives them OBSEC, like, suddenly that's a combo. 5+ on Warrior's insane? Yeah. Like, you have it as a spell currently, though, in Leviathan. And they have it, like, the turn that it matters when the Warriors die, they'll have it anyway. So, like, it's good. Don't get me wrong. I'm not going to say that Crusher Stampede is bad. But I think it's, like, it's at least a debate between Crusher Stampede and the regular stuff. It sounds like the High Fleet Leviathan supplement is going to be going, and I am happy with that. I think that... That would mean that no other... Like, you already basically don't look at any other High Fleet besides Leviathan. And if the Leviathan supplement was still around, you would never, ever play it over one. Which would be upsetting. Anyway, continuing talking about this game. I ended up going first this one, which is a pretty big deal. Ended up running the Harridan to the middle of the table. I did go first, right? Yeah, I did. Moved the Harridan up to the middle of the table. I shuffled around the Hive Guard to get some shots into the bunker. And the game plan, I actually hovered the Harridan this turn, which I rarely do on turn 1. But what I wanted to do was get it across the midline of the table, but in range of the Maleceptor aura, in case I kind of swung low on my ranged attacks and wanted to -1 damage it. I needed to kill the Contemptor first, though, and the Contemptor was sitting right here. If I hovered, obviously it had a ways to go, but, you know, never say never on these charges. So it moves 8, it could move basically to here, and then it would have to charge around this corner, so it'd probably be an 8 or a 9-inch charge. That said, I didn't want to risk it, because if the Contemptor gets into the Harridan and is even able to, like, perform marginally well, it probably plows me for, like, 10 damage. And I couldn't really take that early on in the game. So I was like, it's fine. Harridan, he's got my back. He will kill the Contemptor. But boy, was I wrong. My opponent, out of the first Hive Guard shot and the Harridan's shot, my opponent made 19 out of 20 4+ saves between invulnerables or armor with cover from the Vixilla Defensor on the Contemptor and the 4+ invulnerables against the Hive Guard shots. So the Hive Guard split between Sagittarium units in order to prevent the transhuman. Ended up entirely biffing on one of them. He made every single save. And on the other one, he failed 1. And then the Harridan shot, and he took no damage on the Contemptor. And I was like, oh no, that's not true. I think 2 went through. He ended up taking 4 or 5. And I was, like, flabbergasted. I was like, this is crazy. How much damage my opponent just blanked. So I had to double tap the Hive Guard and put everything into them to kill the Contemptor. Because I couldn't, risk the Contemptor charge on the Harridan. Fortunately, the 4+ saves eventually ran out, and my opponent failed some, and then it died. But I was like, for a brief moment, I was like, this could be very bad. But we got there. It was okay. My opponent did on the flip side. So we scored engaged on all fronts. We got the Warriors over here on this side of the table a quarter. We got the Harridan in the front there. My opponent moved up. He got a charge with the shield unit onto the Harridan. It was like a 6 or 7-inch charge, I think. All of the Sagittarium moved up into this brick in the middle and just fired into the Hyrule. And the Calexis Assassin actually ran over to the objective over here to stand on it. Now, my opponent's lack of, flying units and fast stuff really ended up starting to hurt here, because he had a lot of deep strikers. All of the Terminators were in reserve, but he was essentially banking on the Terminators to make charges out of deep strike in order to kind of interact with me on my side of the table. And that's not a super duper great plan. I took a little bit of damage. I took 5 or 6 damage on the Harridan from the Sagittarium. He had revealed Rendax, so he had some auto wounds on 6s. The I was a little bit worried that the Iliastus would fire into these warriors here, and I would have to burn ZP to -1 damage them to keep them alive. But he ended up firing to the Harridan, did like 2, because the profile matchup between on the Harridan versus the Grav Tank is just terrible. It's maybe like one of the worst profile like mismatches in the game, because it's 1 strength lower than it needs to be to wound him on 4s. It's high AP, but he has good invulnerable save, and then it's high level, high volume 2 damage versus -1 damage into a 5-up ignore. It just does nothing against these T8 guys, and especially with the -1 to hit and no access to rerolls, that makes it super brutal. So I did not take as much damage as I thought I would. The Harridan swung back onto the shield guards that charged him. They did 2, I think. Because, again, the shields were up on the Harridan, 4+ invulnerable save and a 5+ ignore, so he wasn't going to do too much damage there. The Harridan swung back, did nothing because he got blanked by Shadowkeepers, and then just peeled out, basically. We kept him on the ground, so continued to hover, but basically out of charge range of anything that could really get to him, and he just started firing into stuff. I moved around the corner with some stuff to get some smites into the shield guard squad that had moved up, and ended up killing them with a Hive Guard activation. The Harridan fired into the Grav Tank, so I was like, all right, this turn we've dealt with the Contemptor, we'll deal with the Grav Tank this turn. and my opponent's like absolutely ludicrous dice continued, and I think the Harridan converted. I didn't +1 damage him, importantly, and the Harridan converted 3 attacks, I think. So we did 9 damage, hitting and wounding on 2s with exploding 6s. I needed to convert 5, and on average, we put 13 and like a half wounds onto the tank. So he has to make, on average, like 10 invulnerable saves. And I think I put 8 through, and he made 5 5-ups. I was like, this is wild, dude. This Harridan's doing nothing. But fortunately, the upside here is that while my army's doing dramatically lower damage than it would be on average, my opponent, so his army doesn't, there's no speed to it. Everything's just a move 6 guy. So I'm not really that worried about him charging me. It's not like I'm not getting punished for having these turns where I do lower than average damage. The one thing that I did do, however, which was pretty lucky, was the Moloch popped up, pinged the Calexis that was on this objective for a mortal wound, and then stood on this side of the table quarter to get some nice engage in all fronts. And then the Hyrule just walked over and flamered that guy to death. So I did have to stand in kind of an awkward situation, closer to all of the characters and stuff, but I didn't feel that bad about it. So moving on, here's the action shot of the Hyrule. Shields up on the Hyrule, Catalyst, and 4+ invulnerable save on him. My psychic phases went very well, by the way, which was pretty handy. I didn't fail a ton of powers. He'd only taken 4 damage from the shooting the previous turn, and I was feeling like he could take this charge. Now, I knew my opponent had phase 2 Rendax available, so he had +1 strength on the charge the coming turn. Wasn't really going to matter on these guys, on the Sagittarum, but it would be a big deal on the shield captain if he elected to go in. So what ended up happening was a little ludicrous. The silly dice continued. My opponent moved up to the center of the table with the Sagittarum. One unit had to advance, I think, to get out of everyone's way. And he shot and charged into the Hyrule with everybody. And I believe he put the Hyrule down to... He wasn't Rendaxed anymore, so he didn't get any auto wounds. And I think he put the Hyrule down another 3 damage or so. So was underperforming in his shooting phase, to be fair. Although I think some of the shots went to the warriors. Yeah, he did kill a warrior with some of the long gun shots in order to stop them from scoring engaged on all fronts. The Terminators came down, so the 2 individuals came down on this side, and the one thing that we can't see is right off the screen here, hanging out with the Maleceptor, is the 2-man Terminator squad. But he's basically, I had shifted the Maleceptor to screen out this back corner, so he couldn't get an easy charge on the Hive Guard, but he could charge the Maleceptor if he wanted to. Unfortunately, all of the Terminators failed their charges, which is unfortunate, the turn that they came back in. So the stuff that charged into the middle, so it was a three-man. One squad had just run to touch the middle objective to take it away from me. One of them had moved up to charge, and then both of the characters, Trajan, who's over here, and the Blade Champion had charged. Trajan converted, if I remember correctly, I had 13 wounds left, I think. He converted 4 attacks through the hit and wound roll. I failed every single 4+ invulnerable save, and then every single 5... no, not every single 5+ ignore. I think like one. I made like one 5-up ignore. So I took like 7 damage. And I think I was down to 6 at that point. So I was like, okay, we need... You know, I didn't think I thought I was going to live and force the double swing off Trajan against this, but it seems like maybe not. The Blade Champion then went with his 3 damage swing, and he has 6, I think, and he converted all 6. And I again failed every invulnerable save and every damage ignore. So those 2 characters, I was like, well, if the characters go and the Sagittarium leave me, like, I get to swing, and then he kills me and I auto-explode, and it feels pretty good because he doesn't have the mortal wound protection. But he killed me with the 2 characters without anything else, and I was like, oh my god, this is wild. So I ended up fighting on death. I split between Trajan and the Blade Champion. I was like, hopefully we can either burn some CP for defensive strats, burn a Moment Shackle, or burn the 3+ invulnerable save on one of these guys. Little did I know. Trajan, I think I wounded 3 times on Trajan, and he made every single invulnerable save, so just no big deal. Just blocks it. And then the Blade Champion didn't pop his 3-up, but I think he did transhuman him, and I converted 1 through for 5 damage. But he had 8 wounds, so he's like, it's fine. I'm not even worried about that. So, unfortunately, the fight phase did not quite go the way I expected. But I mean, to be fair, that Hyrule was sort of asking for it. He was just standing in the middle of the table waiting to be shot for a while. Back to my turn. I responded to the Terminators dropping in. Swarmlord double moved himself around the corner here to fight the two individual Alaris. You can't really see him, unfortunately. Let's move my monitor, maybe. Can we do that? Whoop, there he is. Hello, everyone. It's Swarmlord. He's in the corner. So he moved out with the double move to fight the Terminators. Unfortunately for me, my opponent continues to make all their invulnerable saves, so they took, I think, 1 damage went through, or 1 wound went through on the Terminators, which doesn't kill one. The Maleceptor, on the other hand, moved over to fight the 2 guys in the other corner and ended up just biffing on them because he's a Maleceptor. That's not what he's here for. And then I just moved all the Hive Guard pretty far back. The Harridan moved over, and I did get... I did get a good turn of Harridan shooting, finally. We finally made it. My opponent had moved over with the Dawn Eagle jet bike and charged the Mawloc and pinged it for just a couple. He pinged it for 4. But he was exposed with no lookout sirs at that point. So the Harridan shifted over, fired 1 gun into one of the Sagittarium units, and 1 gun into the shield captain that was right here. And ended up clipping both of them, which was... felt good. All right. we got there with the Harridan shot. He then charged into the tank, and we finally got rid of the tank as well. So I was feeling pretty good. We were way up on attrition. We basically just had to make sure that these like Terminators didn't mess up my day in the back of my deployment zone, and then hopefully the characters would go down eventually. My opponent still had the Telamon in the back alongside the banner guy, but that was all he had holding his back line. And the Telamon, you know, because it was playing so cagey. It was so slow that I wasn't really in danger of hitting me anywhere, so I wasn't that worried about it. So, moving on to my opponent's turn. We have a Blade Champion in melee with my guys here, which is a little bit unfortunate. So what ended up happening was the Blade Champion moved his 6 inches, which is just gets him to about here, I think. Maybe here. He needed an 11-inch charge to get to my objective, and he raw dogged it. So He'd killed 2 Hive Guard with the Sagittarium. They had advanced to push through the wall here and fired into the Hive Guard with all their guns. Ended up killing 2 of them. One with a Drastic Destructor, the other one with the heavy bolter shots. And then big 11-inch charge on the Blade Champion. Fortunately, I had a couple CP remaining at this stage, and I ended up transhumaning the warriors in order to hopefully wrest control back of my objective. And fortunately for me, the Blade Champion did whiff on the transhuman a little bit, only got a couple wounds through, left one guy alive. That meant he counts as 2 objective secured models because he's a custodian infantry, and I had 1 warrior and 1 neurothrope on the objective, so I had 2 models with objective secured as well. That meant that I could hive mind Imperative the warrior to let it count as 2 models and outnumber the Blade Champion, so I could hold control of that objective. So small blessings there, but I was unfortunate that I had to eat that charge. That late in the game. But fortunately for me, things were going my way. I had ended up, I think, eventually clearing the Alaris Custodians in the corner with between Smites and the melee of the Maliceptor. They had done a little bit of damage, but not too much. The Harridan, my opponent tried a super long charge with the Telamon into the Harridan to try a last-ditch effort to kill it. Didn't end up making the charge even with Eternal Penitent because I think he needed like a 10. And the Harridan continued its Reign of Terror. Because the Telamon had moved out, the Harridan killed the Vexillus Praetor. Swarmlord eventually killed the 2 Terminators in the bottom corner on my opponent's turn, double moved himself around and breaking through to kill the Blade Champion as well, so he didn't even get a chance to use his 3+ vulnerable. Again, losing out on that 4+ against Mortals from the Emperor's Chosen is a big deal because it's so much, it reduces so much of that incoming mortal wound damage. And then the Hive Guard ended up clipping, I think the Hive Guard and some Psychic Powers ended up clipping the Sagittarum down. So we had essentially reduced my opponent to Trajan and a Telamon Dreadnought. The Telamon tried to kill the Harridan. The Harridan ran around to do some stuff, and the Telamon punched him, left him on 5, I think. He had been slowly attritioning me down with gunshots off of the random attacks from the Guardian Spears and the Blaze Cannon off of the Telamon as well. There's also several turns where he shot the Harridan for 4 damage with the flamethrower, wounding on 5s, like 2d3 shots, wounding on 5s, and he would roll like 5 attacks, 4 wounds. I was like, this dude and his dice, it was crazy. But fortunately, the army was just fully foot army was had such a tough time getting to me, was really what I think killed it for my opponent. The Shadowkeepers also has a good defense against me because there were a lot of times like this, the Swarmlord attacks and the Maliceptor attacks especially, where trying to get through their good saves with that -1 attack effect was very difficult. But it has no effect against my shooting for the most part because he can reduce my strength, but I don't think it mattered for any of the profiles I had. So having no defense against the shooting was problematic for him. Emperor's Chosen gets around that by just having, dramatically better ranged output. So they're doing much more damage back to me. So exposing themselves to shoot isn't that big of a deal. But the Shadowkeepers don't really have that recourse. So they just eat the Harridan shots and hope for the best, essentially, and they're not really doing too much damage on the swing back. So it was an interesting game. I think my opponent's sort of insane dice kept him in it for a while, but I do think that the Harridan matchup in general is very good against Custodes. Even if they do have the Virtus Praetors, that gives them better board control to hold objectives, but on the flip side, those things die like flies to a Harridan. He doesn't reroll, so Emperor's Auspice does nothing, and they can only transhuman 1 unit. So if they have multiple units, he just splits fire, and they transhuman 1 of them. He kills like 2 bikes in the other one, and then he does the same thing the next turn. And they eventually, probably 2 to 3 battle rounds, and they're out of bikes, essentially. He also one-shots them if he converts a melee attack, which is pretty brutal for them. So, anyway, pretty happy to have gone 2-0. I wasn't really expecting to have a shot at winning the tournament. To be fair, I was expecting a lot of Tau and a lot of Harlequins, as everyone is, and there was a little bit of a Harlequin presence, but not enough for me to hit them this early. But now that I was 2-0, I was feeling it. I did get into that Harlequin menace on the final round though, and this game was really interesting and a little eye-opening for me. I think I talked about in my April Fool's video that I went to a GT a while ago. I played against Eldari round 1, and I got destroyed by D cannons, and I was frustrated with it because the game is very like point and click. Because if my opponent goes first, he shoots my stuff with D cannons, and there's nothing I can do. If I go first, I shoot his D cannons with Headguard. There's nothing he can do without using redeploys to move your stuff out so far out of range that then they cannot contribute to the game. So you have effectively killed them anyway. And I think like the answer to that question is this Harridan list. And that was one thing that I maybe had forgotten. And once that Eldari Codex came out, I probably would have been behooved to switch to a Harridan Crusher Stampede build. Now, I hadn't really perfected the one that I really liked yet, so in my defense, I didn't have a good one to play. But it just answers that question, because the Harridan, while he is a pretty decent profile to get shot by D cannons, he's fast enough that you can deploy out of range or redeploy out of range of them. And he just kills either all the D cannons or all of their Night Spinners in one turn. And if you do that, you don't have to worry about their artillery anymore, and you just get to play in the Sprinkler with the Hive Guard. So, I don't know, mistakes are made. So I was up against mixed Eldari this game. My opponent was playing half Ulthway with Night Spinners, a bunch of Psychers, just a billion Psychers. He had Eldrad, he had a Warlock Conclave, and he had a Shadow Seer, with the intention of just piling Mortal Wounds out, which, to be fair, very good against me. Also pretty good in the Harlequin Mirror match, so I kind of appreciate that. He had interestingly dark Harlequins, not light, because he wasn't all in on the Weavers. He had 4 Voids, 3 Stars, so 3 transports, 4 gun buddies, and I mean, that seems pretty good. But basically, he was on dark in order to get access to the kill your smash characters. So he had a Solitaire and he had a Troop Master upgraded to the 9s. Fortunately for me, their profiles aren't super good against Crusher Stampede stuff, because a lot of it is 2 damage. So I wasn't quite as worried about those guys as I was about the Weavers, but I definitely had to be cognizant of their threat ranges. So as we can see in this picture, the Hive Guard are, oh man, again, you can't really see them. Here they are. Hello, Hive Guard. Chilling on the Mac over here. The Hive Guard are hiding in the corner, away from the Harlequins. They're like, please, Solitaire, don't kill the entire unit in one go. And that is because we're on Data Scry Salvage, so I also have, I know it's a question that's going to come up, but I have the wings off the Harridan because I placed him here, and then realized that I had to deploy my warriors in the corner, so I had to remove them. So I could actually put my models down. We're on Data Scry Salvage, so 6 objectives, 4 across the midline of the table in a diagonal. It's a hold 2 to score 4, hold 3 for 8, and we have our 1 objective in each deployment zone. The objectives are locking for OBSEC only, and the bonus objective is to do an action on your home objective, which then scores you at the end of the turn for each midline objective that you're holding. Which is an interesting one. It's definitely a very different vibe from the previous data. What was it called? Vital Intelligence was the previous version, and I don't know. I mean, it feels better, but it's certainly not fixed. And I do think that it mathematically tends to favor, or statistically tends to favor, the player they're going first. Which I don't know, was pretty frustrating this game, because I figured that whoever won the role to go first was going to have a monumental advantage. I ended up continuing to take engaged on all fronts in this game. I took Grind Them Down, which I almost universally recommend people don't do, and especially against me, because my list is so small. But, I mean, that's part of the benefit, is I'm only going to expose like 2 models for my opponent to shoot at, which means that I have a pretty good chance of grinding, and if he doesn't move to those center objectives, I will destroy him in primary. So I felt pretty good about that. My opponent also had a bunch of characters between the 2 Harlequins characters, plus a Death Jester, 3 Harlequins characters, plus Eldrad, plus the... there's somebody else in there. Is there a Warlock in this list, I think? I guess I could look it up, chat. I don't know what I'm doing. Yeah, so my opponent's list is Shadow Seer, Death Jester. Oh, he had Behareth as well. So Behareth, Eldrad, and the Solitaire. So it was full 5 characters. I never have a good... Despite the fact that oftentimes you can pick out Phoenix Lords to Psychic Interrogation, I never had a good game with Psychic Interrogation into Harlequins, or into Eldari, excuse me, because they tend to have so many Psychers, and the Psychers tend to be so forward positioned that they can deny quite a bit, and so it always ends up being a coin flip. And in this situation, our deployment zones were going to be so far away that I wasn't sure. I didn't want to expose my Psychers to be interrogating his Psychers, because not to mention the fact that a lot of his stuff can be in transports, but also that means that I'm now in threat range of his characters. So seems like a pretty bad trade. So I ended up just with Assassination. The Harridan list tends to assassinate even better than normal Crusher Stampede does, though, to be fair. Because the Harridan's so mobile and he's so big, oftentimes you can pick out characters to punch or to shoot at if they're like, bodyguarded or lookoutsed, excuse me, by stuff behind or that's in front of them. If you fly behind them, you shoot that guy, he's going to die. If you can multi-charge, you charge a character plus a unit, you breaking through one of them and then fight the other one. And generally speaking, if the Harridan converts a single attack, he kills almost any character in the game because he does 6 damage. So the Harridan list, pretty good at clipping characters. So I felt pretty good about that one. My opponent also took Engage in All Fronts, which, as we'll talk about, is a little bit of a mistake. I think just an honest mistake on their part, to be fair. He ended up taking Bring It Down, I believe, and he took... I don't remember what his last secondary was. I apologize. I think it was a Retrieve on Knockmoon Data was what he took. So... was fixing to be a pretty interesting game, I think, because both of our lists are relatively non-standard. He has the Harlequins backed up by artillery versus the big aircraft on my side of the table. Wasn't sure how this was entirely going to go, and I was pretty worried about it, to be fair, because I didn't know if I had what it takes to kill these Harlequins. Now, my opponent won their all to go first, which is why the Hive Guard are hiding in the back there. And I was like, oh no, here we go again. We're about to get artillery into oblivion, and he's gonna take every objective with Star Weavers and Void Weavers. I'm not really gonna have a chance to push back in the game, and I'm probably gonna end up getting eviscerated on primary objective to the point where I have a tough time getting back. He ended up retrieving Knockmoon with his Ranger unit up in this corner, so he just immediately scored off a Knockmoon and used them to score Engage in All Fronts as well. Moved pretty timidly, though. Put a Star Weaver on this objective, and he had actually pushed it forward in order to get some better shots into my stuff, which I think was maybe a mistake. Although not one that you generally get punished too hard for. So he scored a couple points on... scored 3 points on his bonus objective because he did an action on the thing on his home objective, and then scored... can't really see the objective in the side there. 1, 2, 3, because he was holding this one with Rangers. And played very cagey. Passed the turn, fired into the Hive Guard with a Night Spinner, but I transhumaned them, and he rolled a little bit poopy, so he only ended up putting 1 damage through my saves, and elected to just start shooting the Night Spinners elsewhere rather than continue to fire into transhuman. So I think he started to kill warriors, and I think he picked out a couple warriors from this unit. So moving on my first go, I had a very lucky turn, to be perfectly fair. I put Swarmlord out pretty aggressively alongside the Maleceptor. They each put a Smite into the Star Weaver that was hiding on Objective 2, or that wasn't hiding on Objective 2, I should say, because it was inside the terrain rather than behind it, so he could shoot his gun. And ended up just rolling 2 3s on damage and killing it. So, easy game. Why even try? Whatever. That was a pretty big deal, because then I got to fire the Hive Guard into the models on the objective. Fortunately for my opponent, their saves were very good, so I didn't end up actually clipping out the objective, which was unfortunate for me. So I fired the Hive Guard 1 time into the troop, killed 4 of them, so enough to bring them below Lookouts size, but not enough to kill them. Double tapped and fired, I think, 2 into the remaining trooper, and the rest into the Death Jester. The trooper died, but the Death Jester made almost all of his saves and ended up surviving, which was very sad. So I wasn't able to clip out that guy. It would have been really nice to get an assassinate that early. but was asking for a little bit much. Harridan got shields up. The Swarmlord had moved up pretty aggressively in order to get that smite and also to do his to cast on the Harridan. So he moved down to exactly 18 inches from the Swarmlord. Got 4+ of vulnerable save from the Swarmlord, Catalyst from the Maliceptor, and we called it good there. He fired into a Night Spinner. I ended up, instead of pumping him fully, and I think I ended up I did pump him fully, so I exploding 6s in +1 damage him because my opponent had rolled 5 6s on Strands of Fate dice, so he had 5 automatically passing vulnerable saves in the bank. So I knew that if the Harridan undercommitted into a Night Spinner, he wouldn't kill one. So I put everything into the Harridan, shooting at one Night Spinner. I ended up killing it. I put enough damage through that he couldn't have saved it through his 5 automatically passed and vulnerable saves. Which just felt pretty wild. I normally, with the +1 damage turn from the Harridan, I like to be able to split. If I could put one shot into a Void Weaver or maybe kill one unit, or at least shoot into the second Night Spinner and put it into a good place to get killed the next turn, I would feel much better about myself, but was not to be. One thing that kind of pervaded this game was, despite the fact that I had a pretty good first turn, especially my Psychic Phase, I could not complain about my Psychic Phase. I never made a CP regen roll, so I was very bled on CP the entirety of the game. And that ended up being a pretty big deal, especially in round 2. So the troops were dead, but the Death Jester ended up running away with impunity. I killed the Rangers over here at the top with the Hyrule spray. So scored my Engage All Friends, scored my Grind Them Down. Was feeling okay at this point, actually. I was like, I just killed a lot of my opponent's stuff, and I didn't really lose anything for it. My opponent ended up trying to... He focused everything in on the Harridan. So shields were fully up on the Harridan. He was airborne for -1 to be hit, which meant the Void Weavers were having a really tough time dealing damage to him, especially since, as a mixed army, he doesn't have Luck of the Laughing God dice, so he can't offensively reroll. He could only use Strands of Fate on his Eldari stuff. So I took a bunch of Shuriken Cannon shooting, I took a bunch of the Void Weaver shooting, and I took a really powerful Psychic Phase. I think the Psychic Phase dealt about 10-ish mortal wounds every time my opponent went for it. Between the Warlock Council, the Shadow Seer was buffed to do 2 smites. He had the regular smite plus Shards of Light. He also had Mirrored Minds in his loadout as well, and then Eldrad with a smite and Executioner, and then the Warlock Conclave also with a smite, and he has Strands of Fate dice to use on those 2. So the Psychic Phase was very impressive for my opponent. I did fortunately save out pretty well with the Catalyst, and between the Void Weaver shooting, which put 1 shot through my invulnerable saves, which is about average, I think, with the -1 to hit, and then winning on 3s into a 4+. Ended up piling onto him for about 17 damage. So he was about halfway dead after that shooting phase and the Psychic Phase, which was, I think, about average. He did fire his remaining Night Spinner, which was hiding in the craters here, which were dense cover at this event. He fired them into the warriors on objective 6 up at the top, but I ended up using the Unyielding Chitin to -1 damage them and keep that unit alive, which was a very big deal because it allowed them to lock that objective. And again, my opponent doesn't have a ton of... he doesn't have a lot of Deep Strikers and stuff like that. So locking these objectives is a big deal because I can potentially leave them, which is pretty exciting. So this is bottom of my round 2. And what ended up happening was I'll admit I took a lot of time this turn because I wasn't feeling particularly great about the game state. Or I wasn't. It wasn't that I didn't feel great. It was that I was a little bit worried with the amount of damage that the Harridan had suffered. Because if I allow that to happen again, the Harridan's dead, right? So, and I think if I lose the Harridan, the game's just over. That's not 100. That's not true in every single matchup. Sometimes the Harridan does enough damage himself that he can peel things out even if he dies early. But not in this matchup. I think I need him. I need something to be able to deal with Void Weavers, and he's the fastest, and hardest hitting thing I have. So. I was considering a couple of plays. I'll do a little bit of a zoom in here on my opponent's deployment zone because we had some things to consider. One thing that I could do, because the Harridan was he was on this side, just on this side of the wall over here, is I could fly him over and I could stand next to the Shadow Seer. I could then shoot the Shadow Seer to remove the -1 or the range reduction effect, so I could actually start committing with Hive Guard into these guys. And then charge into the Void Weavers. I could kill a Void Weaver on impact with Breaking Through, and then fight the second one in the unit. And if I converted a single attack, winning on 2s, I forget if they're -1 to hit in melee as well. But at least winning on 2s, so I should probably get 4-ish through. Then he dies, and I can overrun away out of harm's way. The awkward part was that the Harridan model is so large. You know, you can imagine it's got big old wings and a big old body, even if it's little bases down here, that if I breaking through this Void Weaver and my opponent intelligently removes it, I can still pile in to fight this guy, except that I hit the edge of the table because they are right up against the edge, and my model isn't allowed to protrude over the edge of the table, even though my base isn't over it. So I actually can't fight that second Void Weaver because I can't get within an inch of it in order to get there. So I would have to do something like move in, charge the Shadow Seer, and fight the Shadow Seer at -1 to be hit with a 4+ invuln. And I felt way worse about doing that because you can't breaking through and kill the thing that you were going to charge and then overrun. You have to actually kill it with the melee attack in order to trigger the overrun. I also considered maybe going this way and fighting this guy. I think there was also a heroic intervention that we could have run into charging the Shadow Seer as well, which would have been problematic, which meant that my opponent could potentially have stopped me from overrunning. So there were a couple different ways that I had ways to engage, in interesting and good ways. But if I did them, there was a chance my opponent could screw me on their positioning. So what I ended up doing, and this felt bad, was the Harridan hovered. He flew over between everything here. So in case I needed to, I had a charge on this Starweaver. But my primary target was the Night Spinner, right? That was standing right here. What I needed to do was get it to the point where a single converted melee attack would kill it. My opponent only had one save banked, one automatic save, which means I needed to convert 2 attacks, which is a little bit scary. You can spend the CP to reroll your wound rolls. You're winning on 3s. But if they lightning fast, and I believe that I was out of range because I had moved pretty far forward, I was out of range to be synaptic linked. So I was hitting on 3s. If they lightning fast, I hit on 4s rerolling 1s, and I need to wound every single time. And I also have to get them to a point where that one attack kills them. This ended up being, I think, the highest likelihood play of peeling the Harridan off the table. So that's what we ended up going for. So he flew over, fired into the Night Spinner, threw the -1 to hit. I rolled abysmal. I was 16 shots. I was hitting on 4s because it was in dense cover, and lightning fast wouldn't have done anything there. I hit 3 times. I did wound them, thankfully, and he took one of them. I think he maybe auto passed one, made one, and then the other one went through. So he wasn't at 6 wounds left, which was very frustrating, and I didn't have any extra attacks. So what I had to do, and this is the part where getting no CP regions over the course of the game was very bad for me because I was super burnt on command points. What I had to do was charge the Harridan into the Night Spinner, breaking through it, to get 3 wounds through its 5+ ignore, and then convert to single attack. Unfortunately, the dice didn't screw me. My opponent elected not to lightning fast, which I think he should have done. If I was in my opponent's shoes, I think I would have lightning fasted. Although he was low on CP at that point, so yeah, maybe not that big of a deal. He was regenerating with Eldrad. Eldrad had the psychic power to regenerate CP, but so he starts low because he had to pay for the Harlequin troop, but still had pretty healthy CP regen throughout the entirety of the game. And but we did end up getting through the one attack we needed to pull the Harridan off the table. I did put up the Moloch. He's not in the picture here, but the Moloch ended up popping up on this side of this objective. So I scored my engage on front still, and he stole my opponent's objective. So we started to blank my opponent's primary score. And that's where things actually started to feel pretty good. There was no indirect fire left on their side of the table, so the Hive Guard were safe, which I felt good about. I was scoring pretty reasonable points on the action. I had the Warriors back here doing the action. I was scoring 2 points on them, and this objective was locked in. So they had to come fight for this objective, and if they moved up aggressively to block it, then I could highbind imperative with the Maliceptor there. Now, one thing I did mention was that on my opponent's second turn, he did blitz the Solitaire in and try to hit the Maliceptor. That was to pile and consolidate to my objective and block me from doing the action on turn 2. So I didn't end up doing it this turn. But he did pretty minimal damage to the Maliceptor itself. And got blown up by smites and stuff. The Swarmlord ended up killing him with a melee attack, but and he fought on death to fight the Swarmlord and punched him for 6 damage, which, I mean, is fine. So, it felt good to get an Assassinate point out of the way, though, to be fair. I think that was a little aggressive by my opponent's part. I think, I don't know, he rolled a little bit bad because he did have a strat to ignore invulnerable saves with the weapon on the... with the rose on the kiss on the Solitaire. So he probably should have done more damage than he did, but the -1 damage on a high volume attack was hurting him pretty heavily. Now my opponent did make... Oh, there's a Moloch. I did take a picture of my Moloch popping up. It's really a Trigon, but don't tell anyone. Yeah, there he is, stealing my opponent's objective. Good job. I think he also failed to do any damage to the Voidweaver. All right, moving on. So my opponent... let's see if I have any better photos of how the rest of the game went. My opponent, on the flip side, actually made some good plays, but I think that ended up hurting him pretty heavily. So what he elected to do on top of round 3 was he continued to sort of feed the objective here with troopers. He piled his trooper squad over that or he piled them out of the transport that were fighting the Moloch, and they ended up going in and just killing the Moloch. Between the Voidweaver shots and fusion on the trooper squad, the Moloch went down. Unfortunately, I was burned on CP pulling the Harlequin off the Harridan off the table last turn, so I couldn't auto explode or anything, which would have been nice. But the Moloch did his job, which was okay. What my opponent ended up doing was bailing out all of his Harlequin troops so that one of them could start doing actions in my opponent's table quarter, because he needed to score retrieve knockpoint data and start doing the action on the objective. He put an empty Starweaver on objective 2 in order to hold it down, and then the Void Weavers fired, I think, alternatively into the Hierodule, which was barriered but not catalysted, if I remember correctly. Oh no, it was catalysted. Yeah, so it was shields up on the Hierodule. So they killed the Moloch, fired into the Hierodule, didn't do enough damage to bracket it, which was good. My opponent then made a very heads up play, which was that he ran Behareth over and fired at the Hierodule. I think maybe did a damage, but then ported him to this corner of the table. He then had, because of his Trance of Fate dice, he had a die available to auto-pass his charge into the warrior that was over here, which meant that he could actually clip that warrior out and wrest control of that objective from me. That said, in order to actually take control of the objective, he had to forego his teleport. So he ended up staying on that objective, which ended up being a pretty big deal, which was pretty helpful to me. So Behareth had knocked me to a 4-point primary, but in doing so, most likely sacrificed himself. So you very rarely get the opportunity to kill Behareth. So as soon as you can take advantage of that, go ahead and do so. Fortunately, I had basically only lost the Moloch and that one Tyranid warrior. It was a very good play on my opponent's part, but it did mean I was relatively open to sort of counterattack as much as I could. And I figured at this point, I was feeling pretty good about my position, my scoring position. My opponent had made a mistake, which I mentioned at the top, where he had taken engaged on all fronts and had planned to score it with the characters as they moved out to do things. But obviously, with the new engaged on all fronts, you have to be 3 models strong in order to, if you're not a monster or vehicle, in order to score it. And he was playing so cagey with the Star Weavers and the Void Weavers that he didn't have that board presence in order to be scoring that successfully. So I was pretty hard up on, or pretty heavily up on secondaries while not being as destroyed on primaries as I assumed I would have been going second. So I figured that this was the turn to push for the, basically push for the win. I needed to throw things at my opponent in order to keep them in their back corner there so I could rack up my points. I ended up killing Behareth. I got smites on him with the Swarmlord and the Maleceptor. We did our 3 mortal wounds in the psychic phase, and then the Hive Guard did an activation, just bunked him in the shooting phase. Ended up killing Behareth, which was, whoa, big, big weight off my shoulders. We ended up getting there. I onslaughted the Harridan, and he was able to climb the terrain in the center. We asked to judge what the play was for these pieces of terrain, and we're told to count them as 1 inch tall. So it costs you an inch to move up and over it, to parkour it with the monster. So the Harridan ended up moving up to here, and Swarmlord, as he ran up to smite into Behareth, double moved the Harridan into the center there. And I figured that at this stage, if Swarmlord was targeted by the Void Weavers and got taken down, and in doing so, they didn't attack any of my actual damage-dealing monsters, I think I was okay with that. So the Harridan got yeeted into my opponent's deployment zone, essentially, breaking through the Star Weaver here, was able to charge in such a way as to touch the objective and engage the Void Weavers alongside the Star Weaver. The Star Weaver blew up, so I take up the objective, and he blanked his attacks into the Void Weavers, so it didn't really matter. But at least we engaged them and forced my opponent to spend CP to fall back and operate. The Harridan also came down that turn and started firing wildly, although I think what he did this turn was he killed... my opponent had moved up with the characters in order to be smiting into the Moloch that was over here, so the characters are actually not on the objective. And all my opponent had there was the Warlock Conclave, which was bodyguarding for Eldrad, actually physically touching the objective, which meant that all I had to do was kill them, and my opponent was blanked on primary again because I had killed the Star Weaver on the other objective. So that's what we did. Blanked my opponent on primary a second turn in a row, and I was feeling pretty good. So this is, I think, round 4. One of the Void Weavers had hopped over the Harridan, used the CP to fall back and shoot, and continued to score this. The other Void Weaver unit was sort of setting up to get engaged on all fronts, but the writing, I think, was at this point was kind of on the wall. Some shots went into the Harridan, and between the shots and the Psychic phase, the Harridan ended up going down this turn, so I did lose him, although the rest of the army was relatively unscathed. The Harridan popped over the wall to fight the second to last player troop that was on this objective back here. Yeah, there it was. He fired alongside the Harridan spray. The Harridan did survive this turn, but he got killed the next turn. Yeah, I think he survived on 2. So alongside the Harridan spray, the Harridan was able to kill the Void Weavers over here because one of them had been damaged by the Harridan the previous turn, and then the spray killed one of them. The Harridan was able to kill the other one, and then breaking through on the player troop over here to blank my opponent on primary again. The mortal wounds on the swing back killed the Harridan, but Harridan mostly remained unscathed and ran around. I think we got the Troop Master was the next character we got, but Eldrad escaped, and my opponent was able to run back over here and grab his engaged on all fronts in the side there on the last turn. But at that point, I had enough board control. I was able to score out my remaining primary. I scored an 8 on primary, continued to get the bonus objective. And with a low engaged on all front score, there wasn't really much my opponent could do to get back because I had been scoring at least 2 on engaged on all fronts all game, in addition to getting grind them down every turn. I missed out on the last turn because I wasn't quite able to clear out the second big unit of Void Weavers. But that did mean that I was pretty significantly up on points. And being able to blank my opponent on primary so often, which, to be honest, I was not expecting to do, because as I've been saying this entire game, or this entire stream, the Harridan list is so terrible at scoring primaries. My opponent just played so much in his corner that all I had to do was clear out a couple of objectives in order to maintain my lead on primary. And my opponent was so preoccupied by dealing damage to the Harridan and the Harridan that the stuff that was sitting on my own objectives got to just stand there for a while. The other benefit is that my Warriors and Hive Guard survived a little bit longer than they normally would in this matchup because the Harridan actually killed my opponent's indirect fire. And that's why I said at the top, maybe the Harridan list was the list I was supposed to have being taken in the super hefty Eldari meta. playing on TTS, you typically see like, you see a lot of Tau generally, and then also Harlequins. But in real life, I think the actual Eldari are much more common, and I think the Harridan list might have been the way to go. So yeah, that was what happened. I think my opponent, he had 3 Warlocks in this conclave, but I think he only played 2. Interesting. That's okay. But that put me at 3-0. I missed out on first place. It was about a 22-person event, I think. So there were 2 undefeateds at the end of the event. The other one was a Tau player who beat me by 2 points. Unfortunately, I had some low-scoring games in there, especially my round 1. An 83-point win is relatively low, and that meant that I wasn't quite able to beat them. So Tau ended up taking the 3-0, beating Sororitas in the finals. That was Cullen, who has been on Throwdown Thursday quite a bit, and has moved back to his Sororitas because he was not having the greatest of fun with Tau, I think, but had a lot more fun playing Adeptus Sororitas. Although ended up losing in the final round himself to put Sam O'Brien with Tau Empire into the top placing, 267. So congratulations to them. I only scored 265, so second place. But to be honest, I wasn't expecting to actually go undefeated with the Harridan list because I wasn't sure if it really fit the metagame as well as I thought it would. For the armies that I played against, it was very good. Although the caveat there is that I think there are, an equal number of pretty well-played matchups in the meta that you also just want to dodge pretty hardcore. I think like Tau is a good example of that. But to be fair, the standard Crusher Stampede list dies almost equally as hard to Tau, at least non-Farside Enclaves Tau. So the fact that I wasn't quite as good as a regular Crusher Stampede against Tau doesn't really matter. And there are some situations where, if you can clip your opponent's shield drones early, a Harridan just kills an entire Crisis Suit, one shot with no problem. And it has an annoying profile for Crisis Suits on the swingback to kill. So it's not like a dead game. It's probably still playable, but it's not great. You don't want to be doing it. But that said, if that's the only matchup that I'm trying to dodge with a Harridan list, I think I probably should have just been playing it the entire time. But again, I hadn't really settled on the list that I really liked, and I think the one piece that I was missing was that Moloch, because multiple times during the game, the Moloch was able to knock my opponent off of their objectives to steal those primary points away from them to keep me up on primary scoring, and also attract attention away from the Harridan, which is a big deal, and in some cases just be able to sit in a table quarter and score engage on all fronts all game and rack up that score. So the Moloch as a tech piece alongside the Harridan was a big deal. And I think a Harpy is very similar, but obviously has the downside of potentially being also taken out before it's able to do its thing, whereas the Moloch is automatically going to be able to take an objective. It's just awkward in those situations where your opponent has a lot of objectives secured, like rounds 1 and 2, where you have to be able to hit an objective that doesn't have the obsec on it, which can sometimes be a little bit tough. But that's all I have to say today. I hope everybody enjoyed this little rundown of the Harridan list. I am a little bit sad that it seems like Harridan's going to have a little bit of trouble in the upcoming Codex. What I hope to see, I know it's not going to happen, but what I hope to see are maybe some changes in the MFM once everything gets reduxed in order to make the Harridan more playable. I mean, specifically, I think you just need to drop its points, probably. It loses so much damage output in the new Codex. In the current Codex, it's 700 points. It can't hold objectives, but it certainly will do more than 700 points of work over the course of a game. In the new Codex, it does significantly less. You get your access to invulnerable saves are much tougher. You need to be playing High Fleet Leviathan, and you need to Hive Nexus it every turn, essentially. So it has to be hovering within the range of your Synaptic Links, which it already kind of had to do. And it's kind of predicated on having access to those the Synapse creatures to give them imperatives. So you can still give it Exploding Sixes with the Prime Imperative. You can still give it an Invulnerable Save with the Zone Thorpe Imperative. But it's so much harder to apply those. Whereas, currently you either just play Germic Symbiosis and call it a day, you play Crusher Stampede, you call it a day, and those are all good. It also, not getting access to any adaptive physiologies is a little bit problematic because, again, it doesn't get that invulnerable save, and you can't double wounds for bracketing. Plus, you don't get the old school synaptic links, so no +1 to hit on it either. So it's essentially -1, maybe -2 to be hit. Or -1, -2 to hit you. It doesn't have pathogenic slime, so it's not going to be +1 damage, so it's capped at 3 damage. So already, we're talking about potentially like a 40% reduction in its output, which is like sort of wild when you think about just the level of damage it was capable of previously versus now. I don't think that's the end of the world. I think its damage, a lot of times it would overkill whatever it was shooting at. It hedged its bets because it's a very spiky unit. But again, you can't be putting like a 700-point unit in your army that's like going to cost it's going to take all your CP and do and you're just hoping for that it rolls okay. That said, I think the army around it's going to be a little bit better. You're better at holding objectives now because your army's a little bit tougher, and you get things like untargetable hive tyrants and stuff that you can actually fight over the midboard with. So you win some, you lose some. But again, I hope it would drop to like 500 points or something, and I think it would be very playable in the new Codex. Now, I do have an RTT coming up this weekend as well that I'm going to be playing in. It doesn't look like I will be allowed to use the updated Tyranid Codex, which is not great for somebody who wants to do battle reports on it. But also, I think I'm probably going to be locked to the old existing Tyranid stuff. So I'm going to see if I can play the Harridan there. It does require that you ask how it works on a Donivore deployment zone, though, because that is an open question, I think, and it depends entirely on the TO and what the TO wants to do. It's kind of it's an ambiguously worded rule, so however TOs want to dictate that Harridan's work is fine by me. But if I can't play the Harridan, I'm not sure I want to go, honestly. I would just be playing normal Crusher Stampede stuff, but it would be no Harridan. I don't know. I'm having fun playing Harridan. He's a good guy. He's a good old bloke, Mr. Harridan. But we'll see how things go. I think rules do lock for that one, so it also doesn't use the data slate. So I'm sort of mentally prepared to play against a bunch of Harlequins. If I can't play Harridan, what should I play, chat? Does anybody in chat have any input? Triple Hive Tyrant. It is player plays terrain on my RTT this weekend, so we could try to play like old school Leviathan mid range. That's that army takes so long to sort of operate. Unlike the Harridan list where your games are over in an hour. So I'm like, ooh, that'd be tough. It might be the last gasp of the 8th edition Codex though. So is there? I wonder if there are any like wombo combos that I want to do. Unfortunately, I would play 100 Tyrannocytes if I had them. A Hierophant? I don't have a Hierophant, unfortunately. I don't want to play a Hierophant. I'm not playing a Hierophant. The problem with the Hierophants, although they're probably a lot better in player plays terrain because you can dictate where the terrain goes. The issue with the Hierophants is that they have a base, essentially. They don't hull measure, which means that if you have terrain that the Hierophant can't cross entirely, like it's not allowed to straddle terrain. It has to entirely move over it, which means it's like impossible to move. And then anytime you do move it, you have to do so much extra homework in order to make sure it doesn't sing. It's just not worth it. I think the Hierophant might literally be better in the new Codex though, because it has a built-in invulnerable save. It doesn't run away from your synaptic links because it's not fast enough to do so. But it can encircle the prey because it has the fly keyword, which is, to be fair, also the benefit of the Harridan is you can encircle the prey from the get-go. But so like you can actually, instead of trying to move it, you could just place it and where you need it to go for 1 CP, which is like a little bit better. I don't know. So yeah, it flies, but its movement is shorter than the size of its base. So its base is effectively an 11-inch square, right? which means if you're talking about, like, let's say that these ruins are next to each other, and this is why it might be a little bit better in player place terrain. A Hierophant is essentially one of these bricks, right? It's like it's a little bit smaller, but it's essentially this giant square. So if my Hierophant was standing here and it wanted to move to the center of the table, in this situation it couldn't do that because it would. I think I was a little bit off the camera there. Let's try this again. All right, here's my guy. So we're between these two ruins, right? I have a Hierophant, and it places like here. Probably is the best place it can place, right? Its base is 11 inches, but it can only move 8 inches, right? It's moving, right? I think so, which means. It can't physically fit itself in this position because it's overlapping the terrain with its base. So it can't make that move. So despite the fact that it moves over the terrain, it still has to be able to place over the terrain without any part of that terrain intersecting its legs, which means it's just worthless. Can't it stand on top of the terrain with fly? Not really. You would be hard pressed to find a place that would let you do that. Generally, you have to, like, I don't know, standing on top of the terrain is like such a gray area of rules, and especially with a model that has a base but doesn't have a base, I think that would be tough. You would have to argue that like it could balance like somewhere. I don't know. Because it has to be able to balance on top of the terrain with its base, but its base is invisible, so I don't know how that would work. So, yeah. Anyway, Hierophants are terrible. It's flabbergasting to me that the rules work like that. If they just made a Hierophant hull measure instead of base measure, it would be much better. So, I don't know. Stupid Hierophant. Yeah, I don't know if there's anything else in the 8 Dead Codex I'd really be excited about. So, hoping that they let me play Harridan on Saturday, and if they do, then we'll be doing more Harridan, which should be exciting. So yeah. Anyway, I think we'll go ahead and wrap things up there. Thanks everyone for hanging out with me for this Tactical Tuesday. I will be live on Thursday, obviously, as normal. We're going to be doing Tyranids versus Custodians this time around. New Tyranids, obviously, not 8th edition Tyranids. And I'm not playing this one, actually. So I'm going to be behind the cameras. We'll do some technical stuff. I'll be playing with camera angles, and we'll be doing some fun audience interaction and stuff like that. It'll be a good time. So that's going to be some stream alums. William, who we had last weekend, is going to be playing on it. And Alex, who actually had on our first one, is also going to be playing. So that should be fun. Will's playing Tyranids, Alex playing his Custodies, and I'm excited about it. So come hang out on Thursday for that one. I'm also playing my round 2 from the T5S2 April GT is on Twitch tomorrow. That's going to be at around the same time, 3 p.m. U.S. Eastern. So come hang out with me there. And that's all I have to say. I'll be live on Friday again as well on Twitch, just as normal. So that'll be fun. We did some hobbying yesterday on Twitch, which was a good time. Just painting up some of the new 9th edition Tyranid stuff. And I'm pretty hyped about it. So anyway, thanks everyone for chilling with me. And big thanks to everybody who's a supporter over on Patreon, as well as channel members and Twitch subscribers. All those people, super great. Remember to keep it classy and have happy wargaming. Have very tactical Tuesdaying. See ya.